Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So we're going to continue our discussion with part 2 of my 500 subscriber Q&A, where I answer the questions that were asked and presented to me in the December 5th, 2019 video I uploaded to YouTube, thanking the fact that I now have more than 500 subscribers on this particular channel. So I got a lot of in-depth questions, so we're going to get right into them so that I can answer your questions in depth and also in a manner that is taking up a little bit more time than I thought it would, but I also want to be sure that I answer all the questions that I was asked because I consider this very important. So here's the first question. I'd be interested to hear your comments on the sports card market and how that compares to Magic the Gathering and Pokemon. Well, much like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, the sports card market did go through a massive speculative bubble back in the 1980s and 1990s that was pretty much engineered by a lot of Wall Street billionaires who headed up companies like Flair, Topps, Donruss, Score, and Upper Deck. Now, looking at the market today, a lot of the products that were released into the marketplace from the 1980s and the 1990s are pretty much worthless when it comes to vintage sports cards overall, with a main emphasis on baseball card collecting, because that was pretty much the product that a lot of these companies were pumping onto the market en masse. Now, if you're gonna collect sports cards, you typically wanna go after vintage graded sports cards that were released in the 1970s or earlier. I would honestly recommend, if you're buying for investment, go after the 1950s and earlier, to be honest, guys. You really got to spend the money and go after the key cards, whether it be a Honus Wagner or a Mickey Mantle and the like. Cards that are historic and iconic even to this day for sports enthusiasts. Now, how does this relate to Magic the Gathering and Pokemon? Well, when you look at Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, you have to understand that they're fairly new collectibles in the collectibles marketplace at present time. Magic the Gathering premiered back in 1993, and Pokemon premiered in 1999. So they're really very new collectible crazes that have hit the collectibles marketplace by storm. Now, you have to be very careful because both of those markets, Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, are prone to speculative bubbles. In fact, when Rudy of Alpha Investments released his channel on YouTube back in 2016, the Magic the Gathering marketplace, especially the market for vintage reserve list cards, started to heat up. Well, that trend just is now starting to subsidize. And I know that there's a lot of people that are being hurt financially from the collapsing of a lot of the prices in the reserve list cards of Magic the Gathering. I have always said this, and I'll say this again, just so that you guys are clear where my answer is on this. If you're gonna invest in Magic the Gathering and or Pokemon, your best bet is to not invest in individual cards. I don't care if you're going after an Alpha Black Lotus or a Charizard first edition base hollow foil card from Pokemon. What you want to do is you want to go after vintage factory sealed booster boxes. Make sure they're authentic, make sure they're in near mint condition or better, and if you buy them for the long term, meaning if you go after vintage reserve list booster boxes from Magic the Gathering, or a lot of your Wizards of the Coast booster boxes from Pokemon, and you buy right and you hold them long term, as long as there's a stable collecting market for Magic the Gathering and Pokemon 10 to 20 years out, which I consider there will be, those could be very well good investments. If you're going to speculate in individual cards, it's going to be a fool's game for you. And I think that's how we got into this mess. A lot of people are speculating in either reserve list cards or they're going after modern era product. I've said this before. Look at what happened with Pokemon with the reprinting of Roaring Skies. Do not invest for the long term in modern Magic the Gathering or Pokemon products. Again, it is a fool's game. So to answer your question, how does this compare to the sports card market as a whole? The sports card market, if we're talking about vintage cards, is more established than Magic the Gathering and or Pokemon. Pokemon and Magic the Gathering have several decades to go before a stable secondary market will emerge where it's not as speculative as it is today. That's all I'm going to say on that. And if you're wondering, I am going to be releasing a video on this channel about the collapsing prices of Magic the Gathering reserve list cards and how it affected several clients of mine. I just had to reach out to them and make sure that they knew that I was going to state their scenarios in a generic form without mentioning their names. And they all gave me permission to do that in an upcoming video. So it's going to be very enlightening as to how people were affected by this particular market and what the outcome is. So, next question. Hi, I'm a new subscriber. What are your thoughts on $2 bills? Well, this is a very interesting question because you didn't state what year the $2 bills were printed and or released into the currency marketplace. I'm assuming what you're referring to is the bicentennial 1976 issue or reissue of the $2 bill. That particular series was hoarded en masse by everybody, collectors, speculators, and the like. It's pretty much only worth $2. So if you have a 1976 series $2 bill in your pocket, it's worth roughly $2 unless it is part of what they call in currency collecting a rare block or a rare serial number, or it is a printing error that makes it valuable because the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing, who produces our money in the United States, pretty much has high quality standards where they typically don't allow error or misprint notes to be released into the public. Well, if you do have a note like that, then you may have something valuable. Now, if you're like me and you collect antique and vintage currency, meaning large size currency that was produced in the United States up until 1923, if you collect currency that is 1923 and older, and you're asking me what I think about $2 bills, I think that they're a great investment. I love investing in coins and currency. It's what I do. I have 6 figures tied up in coins and or currency that have a lot of collectible value. In fact, on some of the videos on this channel, I showed you guys some of my coins and currency pieces that I continue to win at auction or have in my possession. So if you're asking me about that, I think that's a great investment. But the reissue of the $2 bill back in 1976, that's pretty much just a novelty. It's worth $2. Spend it, use it for whatever, but just understand it will most likely never have a premium on the secondary market. Enough said on that. Congratulations. I enjoy all your content and would like to hear your thoughts on the outlook for Old Firearms. This is an excellent question. Antique guns, in my opinion, are a great investment. Now, you have to understand what I mean by antique. In my opinion, you should avoid all modern era issues of firearms in most cases if you are quote unquote investing in them and not speculating in them. If you're gonna collect antique firearms, go after the weapons that were used in the Revolutionary War and or the Civil War. The problem with firearms is when you start collecting World War I, World War II, or even Korean War or Vietnam era war firearms, a lot of that stuff is still sitting in government-owned surplus facilities because the government, back in those time periods, made a lot of weapons, ammunition, and related supplies to fight those wars. So if you're gonna go after antique firearms, in my opinion, go after the earliest stuff. Look at the market, watch the trends, and you can make money in that market over the long term. Another excellent market that I encourage people to get involved in, but you have to have a lot of money to do this. I'm talking tens of thousands of dollars. If you want to collect arms and armor from like the Middle Ages period that you know is authentic, a lot of that stuff has a lot of demand and a lot of collectability on the secondary market. I don't see that trend subsidizing anytime soon. A lot of that stuff is very hot right now. It's going to continue to be hot because you got to remember, if it's truly authentic and you know how to appraise it, how to collect it, how to buy it, how to get an expert to authenticate it for you, you can do very well. I know a lot of people in those markets that make a lot of money. I have one friend who, he's not really a friend, I would say acquaintance. He lives out in California. He bought a mace from the Middle Ages that he paid something like $28,000 for. And he hung it on his mantle, literally, in the house. And his girlfriend flips every time she sees it because she hates it. Well, he had it appraised because he bought it 20 years ago. The item's worth $75,000 today. So just to give you an idea as to how hot that market is, there are certain items in that market that are just accelerating in price. And I know a lot of people entering that market. It is insane. Now, in your question, you state, I'm really into guns from the 1880s to the 1980s, and they seem to be a pretty safe investment. I would not be buying guns and or weapons that new, unless if you're doing it for home defense or you're just a hobbyist. I would not be investing in those items, though, from what I want to say is the later half of the 20th century. So I would caution you that if you are going to invest in firearms, I would stick to antique firearms. The first part of your equation where you state that you collect guns from the 1880s is probably your best bet at that rate. So I hope that answers your question. I do agree, though, that market is on fire. If you guys want me to do videos on gun collecting, I am knowledgeable in that realm. Just leave me some comments in this particular video, and I'll gladly do some videos on gun collecting, even if it's an introduction video to help some of my viewers out. I think it's a fascinating hobby. And you got to remember, this is coming from somebody who is technically a liberal progressive, but I do enjoy the hobby of collecting and investing in antique firearms. Just putting that out there. What are some good books about video game collecting? That's an interesting question. The problem with books written on video game collecting is the hobby is fairly new to the collectible scene. So a lot of people have yet to write books on the topic that have become well known in the trade. There is the Overstreet Guide to Collecting Video Games, but I own that book, and I can tell you, you'd probably be better off saving your money than buying that particular book. It's like 20 bucks or 15 bucks on Amazon, but it's really not that good. The books that I really did enjoy on collecting video games were produced many years ago by Digital Press. They did the Digital Press Collector's Guide and the Digital Press Advanced Collector's Guide that covers post 8-bit and 16-bit systems. I really liked what they did with those guides, even though obviously the pricing information is completely obsolete. But I really wish that they would go back and update a lot of that information and re-release new guides out there today in the market. Maybe they have. I haven't been on the Digital Press website in years, guys. I apologize. No offense to Joe Santilli and crew. It's just I haven't gotten around to checking out his site recently in the last year or so. Now, what are your thoughts on sealed Nintendo Labo games, and are they a good investment? The answer is no. None of the esoteric or eccentric items that Nintendo, Sony, or Microsoft are going to produce today are ever going to have any real value long term because too many people are hoarding these items. Now, I know why you are going after Nintendo Labo. A lot of people are starting to collect failed Nintendo products and or franchises thinking that these items equate to the Nintendo Virtual Boy and the like. Nintendo does a lot of experimental things, and I'm glad that they do that. You know, Wii Fit's an example. Even the original Wii and Wii U systems were pretty much revolutionary for the time of their release. That said, though, a lot of their failed products that are being released today are still being hoarded by collectors, speculators, and people hoping that these items are going to be the next big thing. Most of them will not. I would not advise investing in Nintendo Labo games or even most other modern era Nintendo games. It's just not going to have validity because everybody else is doing it. It's like holofoil comic books from the 1990s. Everybody collected them. So if you go back to the 1990s and you look what comic books are valuable, well, it's your first appearance of Deadpool, it's your Amazing Spider-Man 300, it's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics book that appeared issue 1 that nobody cared about when it first was published. That's the stuff that's valuable. It's not none of the holofoil stuff. It's not any of the stuff that people try to speculate in. Be very careful if you're going to adopt a speculator's mindset going into the collectibles trade. So, next question. I don't know if you mentioned this before, and maybe you talked about it, but what are your thoughts on collectible gaming, movie, anime statues, and other merchandise such as First Four Figures, Hot Toys, Good Smile, and the like? Again, guys, this goes back to organic collectability versus mass-produced scarcity. A lot of these companies are manipulating you by their education in finance, economics, and the collectibles trade. They're creating high-end items for the collectibles market that some of the Timmies and Poindexters out there are going after because they hear limited or rare or scarce. And in their minds, those three terms equate to value. That is a fallacy in the antiques and collectibles trade. Rare, limited, and scarce have no effect on the value of any item in the collectibles trade unless there is demand and an established market. Please remember that, guys. Now, there are people that study this market really well, that know what First 4 is releasing, that know what Hot Toys is releasing, and they follow the trends, and they're able to predict what items are going to have short-term speculative demand. So if you're going to buy these items that they produce and you want to make money in this particular marketplace, what you have to do is study the market, and then all the Timmies and the Poindexters out there who miss out on pre-ordering these items, some of those people will pay a premium to get these items 3 or 4 months down the line on the secondary marketplace. That's how you can make your money. Short-term flips. These are not good long-term investments. You have to understand that going in. Be very careful if you have the mindset that a lot of these items that these companies are producing, and I can even put Lego into this category. Lego, many years ago, they had no interest in producing Lego sets that costed $500, $600, $700, $800 each. Well, what happened was their marketing department started doing research on the spending habits of AFOLs, adult fans of Lego. And they realized that if they would start releasing sets that cost $500 plus, there's a segment of the market that would scoop them right up. And that's what's been happening. Well, if you look at a lot of that stuff, those items are bad long-term investments. Those items, however, make good short-term flips in some cases when Lego and a lot of these other companies cease manufacture on these items because there's people in the secondary market that seem to think, well, this item's going out of production. I better buy it now because it might be a good long-term investment. You can literally sell almost anything to those type of people. They don't understand how the collectibles and antiques marketplace works overall. They're very susceptible to terms like limited, rare, or scarce. It's the same reason, guys. If you walk down the action figure aisle in your Walmart or Toys R Us when they were in existence, or Target, and you pick up certain toys, collect all 4, and then it'll say one of them will be scarce, and on the package it'll say rare, hard to find. It's no different when you open up a pack of Magic the Gathering cards. How do they gauge what to put in the pack? Well, every set has so many rare or mythical rare cards. Why do you think that is? They're appealing to the Timmies and the Poindexters out there that think those items have value long term. So enough said on that. I'm going to do this last question, then all the other questions will be answered in part 3 or part 4 of this particular video. Here's my last question. Is it possible, as games become more part of the mainstream pop culture category, that even though the medium is young, it is here to stay, like music or books? This is a question being asked about video games and their relevance in collecting and pop culture. I have never, for the record, said that video games are going anywhere. Video game collecting and video game grading, whether you love or hate both, are here to stay. What I am going to tell you is the market is going to change. If you would go back all the way to the 1990s and you would mention vintage video games, people would think that you were talking about Atari, Intellivision, ColecoVision. Well, today, if you mention vintage video games, people automatically think you're referring to original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, maybe TurboGrafx-16, and Neo Geo. You have to understand that markets change. Pat the NES Punk is 100% correct in his statement when he said, in the year 2050, very few people are going to be collecting original Nintendo games. I agree with him 100%. So understand that the market is going to change, and if you're going to invest in these 1 or 2 generational collectibles, which is what video games pretty much are, and most of what pop culture collecting is, at some point, you have to have your finger on the pulse of the market and be prepared to sell, because that market is going to take a downturn. It's no different than older generations than me started collecting Marx toys or marbles or space toys from the 1950s and 60s. All that stuff is on a downward decline right now because the generation that played with it is either 6 feet under the ground or in your local nursing home. So you have to understand those type of items are not good long-term investments. If you want to invest in long-term investments, whether diversify assets or as a way to make money, you need to go after sophisticated markets in the antiques trade. You're looking at coins, currency, art, historical documents, antique furniture, antique bottles, collectible first edition books, items like that. You cannot put your money in pop culture based collectibles and just forget about it and think when you go to sell that item 10, 20, 30 years from now, it's going to be worth more than what it is today. I hope that answers your question. I thank you for viewing. Part 3 of this particular series will air within the coming days. Thanks, guys, and have a great day.